Hi, welcome to Keto Life Support, where we make your keto life sustainable, fun, and low stress. I'm Kim Howerton from theketonist.com, and I'll be coming to you weekly with some of my keto besties to bring you the practical, real-world keto advice that you need. Quick disclaimer, I am not a doctor, and even if we have a doctor in the house, he or she is not your doctor, and nothing on this show should be taken as medical advice. Always check with a trusted medical professional about your personal medical concerns. Hi, and welcome to Keto Life Support. This is Kim Howerton, and I am here with Carrie Brown.
Hello.
Hello.
I feel like it's that time in the holidays where we could both do some life support too. Very busy month.
It is a very busy time for us this time of year. I don't know why I have this accent now. So I'm talking to Carrie Brown. I have my accent is terrible though, so we'll just move on.
Oh, was that a British accent?
I don't even know what it was. I don't know. I have no actual idea what kind of accent it was. It's more that you guys were recording this in the morning, and I am not a morning person, and somehow that makes me ridiculous in the morning. And it also sort of like sound like a smoker.
I have to tell you, lovely people, that despite Kim claiming that she's not a morning person, I can see her and she looks adorable. So,
thank you. I appreciate that. I actually sort of brush my hair.
And I swear, and I know you did a recent post on Instagram where you had a picture of you at 12, at 20, at 34, right. At 43, and you're like aging backwards.
Thank you. I don't look younger than I did when I was 12, thankfully, though.
Not quite, but your face is slimmer than when you were 12, so that's a thing.
That's so I was tempted to put up a picture from when I was 8. That was like the last time that when I was like that was right after that was when I started putting on significant amounts of weight. So
yeah, no, if you do not follow Kim at the Ketonist on Instagram, you should, because her transformation pictures are amazing, and her face is remarkably slimmer and pointy chinner than, if that's a expression, than they were. So, and she definitely looks younger than she did 9 years ago.
That is very true. I looked sort of run down when I was in my 30s. Rough
Yay, keto.
Yay, keto. All right. So I haven't seen any of Carrie Brown's earlier pictures because she is, I think, maybe an alien. That's what I've decided.
That's because there aren't any. There are
appeared out of a shell.
And as you know, for the most part, there are still no Carrie Brown pictures because I still hate having my picture taken, and selfies. If you see a selfie of me, it's typically my feet. So
yeah, it's people get on me for posting feet pictures all the time too. I'm like, I'm alone. Right. My feet are the only easy part.
I just don't like my head. So
all right. Well, yeah, yeah. I had to put up I was trying to find a 10-year-old picture, but because during my 30s, I would avoid the camera so hard. There are like 4 pictures of me. It's I don't have a picture a year. It just doesn't happen.
I think that's probably 4 more than I have of me in my 30s. So, and my parents didn't have a camera, and they were not picture taking people.
You don't even have kid pictures.
Yeah, no. I think there's like one when I was like 3 weeks old in my pram. And maybe one a year sitting on Santa's knee, but yeah, pretty much I'm pictureless.
Wow.
So right, maybe I am an alien.
You might be an alien. So we talked the other day about holiday meals, and we got to gabbing so much we ran out of time to talk about dessert.
It's a common problem.
I understand. So desserts are an interesting topic and in the keto world, because there are a lot of people who go keto who really identify as sort of a food addict, right? And so there is sort of this whole, like, if you feed your cravings, they won't go away. And so it is kind of an open point of discussion if people want to even eat desserts at all.
Right. And absolutely, desserts should be a personal choice based on what you like to eat and how the ingredients used in desserts affect you.
Right,
but
absolutely.
If you are reaching your goals and you're happy, do not let anyone tell you that you shouldn't eat sweets on keto.
Right. So here's the thing: is we can get this really twisted. You know, Nick Mailer talks about this. I love Nick Mailer. I know you do too.
I do.
That, like, we turn food into a moral issue. You know, sort of, you look at, like, he has a talk about this, that if you look at the clean eating movement, which is sort of more paleo concept, but even the word clean versus dirty is very, like, puritanical. And this idea that if you eat things that taste good, then you're being immoral almost. That you're
right.
It's sort of the same thing. People will say things often. Do you hear these people, right? Eat to live, don't live to eat, kind of thing. And people often get wrapped up in that idea that food should only be minimally enjoyable. It shouldn't be super enjoyable. And if you find your food too enjoyable, then you might be too obsessed with your food. And it gets a little bit crazy making for those of us that actually really like food.
Right. And the one thing that just makes me want to smack my head on my desk when I see it is when people will say things like, if you've just switched to eating ketofied versions of garbage, then don't expect to get any results. And I'm like, you're making it with things that have no carbs. Like, how can it possibly be true that you're going to continue to get the same results of eating garbage and you know, industrial seed and vegetable oils if you're not actually eating any of those things? Like, the nonsensical lack of logic in that whole statement, it just makes me want to, headbutt my desk.
Right. I mean, there are some potential issues to watch out for. So
right.
If when you eat keto sweetened foods or keto luxurious foods or whatever you want to say, and you never feel satisfied and you could eat like 3 portions of it and you feel sort of out of control about it and you can't stop thinking about it, like you made a batch of keto cookies, they're in your kitchen and you can't wait to get home to have some, and every time you walk by the kitchen you go in and grab one. You know, these are clues that maybe you're not in a place where this is an appropriate way to function.
Right. Absolutely agree with you. I just want to be clear that eating an biscuit made of almond flour and real whole foods will never have the same effect on you as eating a biscuit made with wheat flour and crappy oils. But there's some people out there that will say if you're just eating ketofied garbage, you're never going to get anywhere, and that's just clearly illogical and ridiculous.
Right. And here's my other concern, and I agree that is ridiculous. My other concern is that some of us will hear things like, you know, if you're eating dessert, you're doing it wrong, you know, and then be somewhat tempted at Thanksgiving, right? They go to their moms or their cousins and you're saying, I'm going to be really good on my keto approach and I'm just going to not have dessert, right? And so they don't plan ahead. They don't make a keto dessert. They're just there and they're like, I'm just going to not have dessert. I'm just going to skip it. That is perfectly reasonable for some of us, but you got to know yourself, because for others of you, you're going to be sitting there at the table surrounded by pies, none of which you can eat. And you're going to decide, screw it, I'm going to go and have a big plate full of pie. And then, well, I have this big plate full of pie, so sure, I'll take some leftover insert carby food and spend, hey, it's the day after Thanksgiving, we're having leftovers. Well, I might as well have another piece, and suddenly you're off to the races, eating all sorts of carby garbage that you don't want to eat. Whereas maybe if you had made yourself a delightful keto cheesecake, you would have had one piece of that, felt good about that, and then not gone home thinking, well, I already ruined XYZ, so I might as well keep going. And not that you have to have that thought, but right. A lot of us have that thought.
Right. And we are absolutely not advocating that you eat keto desserts 3 times a day and that would be okay. That's not what we're saying. We the keto dessert should still be a treat. It should not be something you're doing all the time. But if you enjoy desserts, because not everybody does, but if you enjoy desserts and they help to keep you from eating the non-keto versions, and you're still moving towards your goals, which are not the same as anyone else's goals, then we don't want you to deny yourself that pleasure for no good reason. That's what we're saying.
Absolutely. So hopefully that helps some of you understand, know yourself. Know if you have options that keep you, quote unquote, keto, you'll do better long term. And that was true for me. When I first started keto, I had more keto desserts than I do now. I still didn't have them every day because I felt like it was super important for me to start to differentiate sort of everyday food from special food. And so that kind of brain retraining needs to happen. But it made my first few keto holidays when I was keto, when I was the only one keto, super simple, and I never felt left out or deprived.
Right. And I think, well, no, I don't think, I know. I have had thousands of people tell me in various forums, emails, or, in groups or whatever, who said, without your chocolate truffles or without fat bombs or without that, I would not have been able to stick to keto when I got started. So for a lot of people, it's the treats that keep them on the path long enough until they get to the point where they lose the sweet monster, or their body heals and regulates and, and they get off that roller coaster. I've literally had thousands of people tell me that they, without the treats, which I think is what you just said, right? Because you used to eat a lot more treats, now you eat right. less. A lot of people would have fallen off the wagon entirely without the treats. So my position is, if the fat bombs and the treats keep you on the keto train when you're starting out, don't let anybody tell you that you're not doing it right, or that you're failing, or that you're not keto, or any of that other nonsense. Don't let anybody tell you any of those things. If they're keeping you on the keto train, we would rather you eat those than fall off the train altogether and start eating carbs and grains and sugars again.
Right, absolutely. And I think that is a very important point, and hopefully we drove that one home for people. So let's talk a little bit. The first thing, actually, I think I'm springing this on Carrie. Sorry, Carrie. Let's talk.
You do this every time. I'm getting used to it now.
I just where my brain goes.
Let's talk a little bit about sweetener use first, because there's a couple of different aspects. One of which is how the sweeteners work with your body. And the second is how they work with the food. And they're both super important or things won't work out.
Right.
So what are the sort of main sweeteners that people tend to use on keto?
So xylitol, erythritol, stevia, monk fruit, and now allulose.
Right.
In my mind, those are the 5 big ones. There are a few others that are floating around, but they're typically, there's not a lot is known about them, and they're super expensive. One that comes to mind is Boca Sweet.
Right.
So I would stick with one of the 5. And as Kim says, there's the problems with sweeteners are, and as more and more people have gone keto, and the longer Kim and I have done what we do, we are very, very clear now that all of those 5 different sweeteners affect all of you lovely people in different ways. Xylitol doesn't affect me. Some people, it has them running to the bathroom. Some people, it spikes their blood sugar like regular sugar. But you can say that same thing for all of them. The allulose is a bit newer, so we don't have quite so much data on that, but I'm not getting a lot of feedback that it spikes blood sugar or causes bathroom issues in the majority of people. But erythritol and xylitol, definitely. Some people it's great for, others not so much. Stevia, actually, and I know I put an R in there and there isn't an R. I can't help it. It's just the way my mouth works.
Stevia.
That I cannot. I have the bitter gene, so everything bitter tastes uber bitter to me, and so I can't stand stevia, so I never use it. And monk fruit, I have recently discovered triggers migraines, so I also do not eat monk fruit. But a word on monk fruit. When most people say monk fruit, what they actually mean is a blended product that is like 98% erythritol with a tiny bit of monk fruit added to make it sweeter. So when most people say monk fruit, they're not talking about pure monk fruit. They're talking about an erythritol blend. And the reason I'm saying that is because when we switch over to talking about the cooking properties, you need to understand that your Lakanto, for example, is erythritol, and it brings with it all of the problems that plain erythritol brings with it. And the same with
Swerve.
Swerve is basically erythritol. So it brings with it all the problems that erythritol brings with it when it comes to baking. So right. just understand whatever sweetener you choose, whatever one you find works for your gut and your pets, because of course pets and xylitol is not a good mix, and also works for your blood sugar and your goals and all that. Make sure you understand what it is you're actually eating, i.e. read the labels all the time. The other problem with sweeteners, which makes me completely insane, is that, for example, Truvia, all the Truvias are different. Like you can't pick up Truvia and think you're getting something that's keto, because the Truvia baking blend, I believe it's the Truvia baking blend, is half dextrose. And so one Truvia is not the same as all the others. You can't buy the Truvia for coffee and think that what you're getting when you buy Truvia in a packet is the same thing. With the blends, you have to read the label to make sure that what you have has no sugar, dextrose, maltodextrin, or other noxious sugar substitutes in.
Right. So Carrie and I, over our years of keto, have learned there are certain tried and true brands that we know we can buy because they don't add a lot of junk. And then certain brands add a lot of junk. And even the tried and true brands, I still read the label every time I get a new one, because you never know when a company changes their formula.
That is absolute hashtag truth.
Yeah, because you'll be like, oh, it's the same one I've gotten 10,000. Oh, there's dextrose in here now.
Right. And suddenly you find you're eating what you always knew was safe, and then suddenly you're not losing, or you're in a stall, or things
aren't working. Migraine all of a sudden.
Or you get a migraine all of a sudden and you don't know why. And it's because the manufacturers have changed what goes into their product. So this is one of the reasons why there's 3 sweeteners I use. I use xylitol, I use erythritol, and I use allulose. But they're 100%. I don't use any of the blends. I don't use any of the brands. I just buy plain xylitol, plain erythritol, and plain allulose, and that's why. Because then I don't have to worry about them changing anything, putting in fillers, bulkers, dextrose, and all that nonsense. Plus, they're a lot cheaper. So if you're on a budget, I'm certainly on a budget. If you're on a budget, then the plain sweeteners the non-blends are cheaper.
Right. And I actually tend to, when I bake, I use Swerve because I get the best results from it. But I also stay in contact with the lovely people at Swerve and make sure we're still on the same page. And I check my ingredient list. And the reason I like Swerve is it's a combination of erythritol and oligosaccharides, which is basically like a natural filler form of, is it inulin? It's related to it. It's like a natural sweet element. Eaten in giant quantities, you're going to get a stomach ache, but as a small amount in this situation, tends not to. The reason I like that one is I have a belief that when you mix sweeteners, keto sweeteners, they make it taste more like sugar. So I tend to also use, almost all of my baking recipes, I have some Swerve and some stevia glycerite, which is a non-bittered form of stevia. And so we, like Carrie and I are different. We each have our own way that we like to, layer our flavors and bring things together. And so, you'll, just to bring home the point, every single person tends to follow a different pattern when they're cooking. But what's interesting is a lot of people will say, oh, I hate Swerve. And then I'll give them something made with Swerve and they'll be like, this is delicious. And, maybe somebody says, I might say, oh, I don't use pure erythritol because I prefer to blend it with other things. I'll eat one of Carrie's desserts and I'll think this is delicious. So, it's very much about you finding your own cooking rhythm.
Yeah. And I tried to love Swerve, but it has an aftertaste for me. I don't like the taste of it. So, but it's also more expensive because it's a blend. So that's another reason.
Pay more for that aftertaste.
Right, you pay more for that aftertaste. So I think the net of that last few minutes was, although maybe we didn't spell it out clearly enough, was don't let anybody tell you how you're going to react to any of the sweeteners in terms of gut response or blood sugar insulin response. Don't let anybody tell you that xylitol does this to everybody or erythritol does this to everybody, or don't let anybody tell you that. And if you see someone saying, an absolute, erythritol does this or allulose does that, run away, because that ain't true.
Right. And you can definitely look at people telling you realities like, of the sweeteners, the majority of people have the least response to erythritol. Like, that is a reality that is statistically real. Mm-hmm. But even if only 0.5% have a response to erythritol, we can't guarantee you are not that 0.5%.
Right. And if you are, then you're getting derailed and not understanding why. And because we're human, most of us would put it down to, I'm failing, I'm doing it wrong, the keto doesn't work for me, and so on and so forth, which is not helpful in any way, shape or form, especially if you then discover that you were one of those few people for whom erythritol causes a response that's not helpful for you.
Right. A couple of things, just because Carrie mentioned this briefly, and I think everybody knows this by now, but I always bring it up. Xylitol is toxic to dogs, like deadly toxic. Don't think they'll just throw up. So make sure if you're a household where your dog gets into your food, don't buy it.
There is actually a long, very good blog post up on carriebrown.com about that. I didn't write. Somebody who I think she's educated in xylitol and pets a lot. So if that's a thing of an interest to you, if you just go to carriebrown.com and type in xylitol, there is an article all about that and dogs. And if your dog does get some xylitol, what to do to ward off the effects and so on and so forth.
Right. Essentially, it sends them into a hypoglycemic coma, which is bad. Right. And then for me, just as an example, when I first started keto and I would have anything with xylitol in it, I would have 0 ketones a few hours later. I'd go from high ketones to no ketones. And that was showing me that in my body, I have an insulin response to xylitol. That is not the case for every single person, but that it was the case for me. And so we all have to look at what are the effects. Now, from a functional effect, me having xylitol, and I'll eat something with xylitol in it now a couple times a year. Like if somebody made ice cream, or I want this cranberry at Thanksgiving that has xylitol in it, there's no functional effect for me, if that makes sense. I don't feel bad. I don't get a stomach ache. I don't get a headache. My day isn't ruined by it. And so I don't really have a problem with it now, but it would be a problem for me potentially if I ate it every day. And so there's not just what the immediate effect is to look at, but then how often are you doing it potentially to look at?
Right. And that's a good point in that also things change. And I have a very weird body, but I went through 3 months where if I ate erythritol, I threw up. So I didn't eat erythritol for 6 months, and now I eat erythritol and absolutely fine. But the same thing happened with lamb, and the same thing happened with eggs. And so my body is just weird that way, but I'm not the only one. So don't assume, and like Kim said, it used to be that she had this massive response to xylitol. Now she doesn't so much. So bear in mind that things also change. So what was true for you, if you've been keto for 2 years, what was true for you 2 years ago may not still be true now. So I think it's worthwhile just, retesting yourself with things that you enjoy that you thought maybe you couldn't eat, maybe you can now. And maybe you'll find that you suddenly can't tolerate something that you've been fine with up to this point. So key takeaway is we change as we heal and as we age and, environmental effects and whatnot. So don't think that anything is static, because it's not.
Right. So let's move on to talking a little bit more. Oh, one other thing. If you have really bad ragweed allergies, stevia is a relative, so you might have some issues with those. I'm just mentioning that. Okay, so let's move on to function, right? The function of desserts with different sweeteners. You know a lot about this, Carrie Brown. There are certain desserts that will work with certain sweeteners, certain desserts that are super flexible, and other desserts that won't work at all.
Right.
And so I just think to step in about that monk fruit thing, because people are very confused about it what you explained. So I have some pure monk fruit powder in my kitchen.
Me too.
You cannot use that thing for anything. It is so hyper. It's I don't know if anyone's ever been to where there's a sandy beach where it feels like cornstarch. It's like
right.
super fine powder.
And you literally, but like a quarter of a teaspoon is like 4 ounces of sugar in sweetness. It's
right.
Crazy.
I once tried to use it, and I was down to trying an eighth of a teaspoon in an entire recipe of something, and it was inedibly sweet. And so it is, so be glad that they're not selling you pure monk fruit, because you cannot use that. Like, it is so hard to use because your brain is just not like, I guess if you were working on an industrial scale and you were making panna cotta for 70, you might be able to measure in a small enough quantity. But so anyway, I just wanted to say that that's part of, so one of the reasons is pure monk fruit is ridiculously expensive. The second is it's almost impossible to use.
Right. So that makes it more important for you all to understand that when you say monk fruit, you're really talking about erythritol, which is important when we're talking about the functionality of the sweeteners. You're really using erythritol with the tiniest bit of monk fruit in, but from a functional standpoint, it's the erythritol you need to know about.
Right. So the one thing people will be confused is you might get a product that says it has monk fruit in it, and in a commercial kitchen, they can dose it out in a better way. Also, they're making, like 7,000 cookies, not,
right.
7. And so it's one of those things that's a little different. And I will make one note. Lecanto, the brand, does have a liquid product that is just monk fruit and water. It's just very watered down. And so it is technically pure monk fruit because water doesn't really count, but it's extremely watered down. So it's in a quantity where you're not going to poison yourself with sweetness, because you put a couple drops in.
The other thing that a lot of the people who are not bakers or trained as such do not understand is that the sugars or the sweeteners do not always just have a function of sweetening. So if you put sweetener in coffee, you're just making the coffee sweetener. But if you're using sugar in a lot of particularly dessert recipes, it has functions other than sweetness. So, for example, if the recipe calls for erythritol or xylitol or allulose, you can't replace that with the equivalent sweetness of stevia because you're not just wanting the sweetness. Like, you can't use your half teaspoon of stevia to make meringues. You right. actually need the bulk. So if you're just using a sweetener for sweetness, you can use anything you want. You can use pure monk fruit, you can use stevia, you can use all the things, and it doesn't matter. But when it comes to desserts and baking, a lot of them rely on, like, for example, ice cream. You can't put stevia in, replace the sweetener in ice cream with stevia because the sweetener does a lot of other things instead of just sweetening. So just be careful. You cannot change sweeteners out willy-nilly. Well, you can, but you're going to be sad if you do.
If you like to experiment, feel free.
You might be wasting a lot of almond flour.
Come to work, maybe not. Until you start to understand the chemistry of it. Like if you get the chemistry of it, then you should be able to make some changes. But one thing I do notice over time is that people's sweet tooth changes and they like things less and less and less sweet than they do when they first went keto or before they were keto. So I often find, even when I'm using somebody else's recipe, I do reduce the sweetener quantity quite a bit. And usually that works out, but in something like a meringue, for example, which has no structural elements other than eggs and sweetener, you can't do that, or else you won't make a meringue. If I did it in a cake, it works fine to reduce the sweetener, but you have to really actually understand the structural elements in any food before you can start tinkering.
And that's why you want to be super careful about where you source your recipes from, because you want great recipes that have been developed by people that understand this stuff, so that you can just follow the recipe. If you start fiddling with the recipe, you're almost certainly going to run into a problem. But you do want great recipes, and sad but true, a lot of the recipes, particularly on Pinterest and just, Dr. Google, you're going to come up with recipes that are not great, that don't work, that taste bad, and you're going to be sad. So, find people's recipes to use who know what they're doing.
Right. The other thing is, a lot of times people will come into keto groups and they'll say things like, I have this recipe for X, Y, pie, cookies, cake, whatever. And it's a non-keto recipe. How much almond flour do I substitute for the regular flour? And I'm like, it doesn't work that way. It's not. It
doesn't.
You need to actually build the recipe from the ground up again.
Yep, you do. But I think there's so many bad recipes out there, or there's so many people out there who don't understand what they're doing, or they're copying recipes from somewhere else, but they don't actually understand how they work. Is they're saying, oh, that's easy, just switch out the flour for almond flour and, or coconut flour, and switch out the sweetener and you'll be good. But I think that contributes to a lot of the keto doesn't work, keto doesn't taste great, keto's super expensive. I think all of that is contributing to a lot of the negativity around keto, because people are wasting time, they're wasting money, and they're not getting delicious results. And who wants to stay on anything that isn't delicious?
Right. And so let's talk a little bit about actual desserts that we like that work and don't work. So one of the things that, people will say to me when I'm like, hey, what kind of recipes do you want this year so that you can have them for your holiday, and a lot of people will come in with requests like, I don't know, Carrie, what do they request of you that you're like,
Okay, so British person here, all the British people come to me. It's amazing how I sound so British after all this time. All these British and Australians and some Canadians come to me and say, it's Christmas, we want keto mince pies, or it's Christmas, we want keto Christmas pudding, and we want keto fruitcake. And I'm sorry to have to tell you that there are some things in the world that cannot be ketofied, and those are 3 things. And I know those are 3 really, really, really big things for British and Australian, some Canadians. You're just going to have to find something else that you love, because mince pies, it's the mince.
What is a mince pie?
So
know what it is.
It's made with something called mincemeat, which is nothing to do with beef or minced meat. Mincemeat it's essentially dried fruit in a very, very, very thick syrup.
Okay.
And it's called mincemeat, all one word. And so what you do is you get a short crust pastry base, like a little tartlet, and you fill it with this mincemeat, and you put a lid of pastry on it and you bake it. So you've got this little little pastry. Anyway.
So it's basically like a dried fruit and sugar pie.
It's like a dried fruit compote baked in pastry.
Got it.
And then, of course, Christmas pudding is basically an enormous amount of dried fruit loosely held together with a little bit of flour, which is why it's so thick and stodgy and fabulous. But it's the dried fruit that's the problem with all three of those things. Christmas cake, Christmas pudding, mincemeat, sweet mincemeat. Can't do it because there's nothing you can do in place of the dried fruit that would even come close to replicating the texture or the taste. So British people, I am sorry. I wish I had better news.
Okay. Well, we do have good news on other fronts that, like, there are a ton of amazing desserts that you can make.
Yes.
So one of the desserts that we've talked about a little bit, and this is very Australian because it's hot at Christmas time in Australia because they're on the other side of the world from where I live. And so they tend to be in shorts that time of year. And so they don't want so much hot. Now that's a weird way to say that. They want things that are good cold in the dessert arena. And so pavlova has become a very popular Australian dessert. I know nothing about the history of it except that I know it's popular in Australia because I get the request for it. And so 2 years ago for Christmas, I made a pavlova, except my family now calls it a I can't talk. My family now calls it a Pavlovian because that's what my family does. Everybody mishears something and then it becomes the family joke. Like my grandma's ex-boyfriend was called jalapeno for years because his name was Eugene, which in Spanish is Eugenio, and Eugenio became jalapeno. Anyway, my family is bad at things like that. And then it just becomes, I think everybody needs hearing aids, basically. So, anyway,
Pavlova.
I digress. Thank you. The pavlova. So the pavlova is a layered dessert. The Brits also make it, not just the Australians, but they make it probably in the summer. And it's whipped egg white. It's a meringue, right?
It's meringue
cake. So as opposed to the little meringues, though, like when you make a meringue cookie, they're kind of crispy all the way through. When you make a meringue cake, it's a little bit softer in the middle.
Yeah, it should be, and it should be gooey.
Right.
Gooey in the middle and crisp on the outside.
So so it's really very simple. You are making but making a meringue really freaks a lot of people out because you have to know how to beat egg whites properly, which is harder than it sounds.
2 top tips for egg whites. Make sure everything you're using is sparkly clean, like super sparkly clean. And make sure when you're separating your egg whites, there is not one cell of egg yolk gets in there, because if you do, you're going to have to start all over. Fat will collapse a meringue faster than anything else on earth. So that's why those 2 things will cause your meringue to fail.
Right. And so, as I mentioned earlier, one of the main structural elements of a meringue is the sweetener. So by nature, all meringues are incredibly sweet because you need enough sweetener in them to help with the structure. And so what I tend to do is pair it with not sweet things. So when I made a meringue, I topped it with some very, very tart lemon curd and some whipped cream that I didn't sweeten so that balanced out the flavors.
Now I want lemon curd meringue pie.
It's very tasty. Okay, so what are some other traditional holiday time desserts that you find work exceptionally well on the ketogenic approach?
So luckily, Americans love all the pie things. So good news, your pecan pie and your pumpkin pie work perfectly as keto replacements. And both Kim, I do for sure, but yeah, both Kim and I have fabulous recipes for both of those things in our cookbooks that work brilliantly. Of course, they'll be slightly different because Kim did a Kim version and she's an American, and I did a Carrie version and I'm not. But anyway, so it's a lot easier to recreate the traditional American food than it is the traditional British Christmas food.
Right.
So, and I keep, the cranberry thing keeps popping in my head because on the functionality side. So I'm just going to say it now, since this is the week of Thanksgiving. Do not make your cranberry, whether you do the gelid kind or whether you do the whole berry kind, do not use erythritol because you will have crunchy cranberry. Just don't. Use xylitol or use allulose. Do not use erythritol. You will be sad.
I did an experiment 2 years ago where I made cranberry with every type of sweetener I had in my kitchen so that I could see, what it came out with like, wow, grammatically, that was a mess. How it came out. And I indeed, when you do, so the traditional cranberry recipe is basically a bag of cranberries and a cup of sweetener, right? And water. And some variety of that and some ratio that looks like that. If you're making that kind of recipe, it is indeed true that you want to use xylitol, and you've used allulose. Does that work?
Yes, allulose works fine.
They don't get the crispy crunchies. I have actually experimented with all the others, and if you make an exceedingly tart cranberry sauce, so you're hardly putting any sweetener in, you can do it with a little bit of stevia, a little bit of erythritol, but I'm talking less than a quarter cup versus a whole cup. And it won't get noticeably terribly crunchy, because what happens is when things get cold, when erythritol gets cold, it crystallizes.
Right.
And I'm just bringing this up because somebody may be allergic to both to both xylitol and, just in the off chance. So it is possible, but you have to way reduce the sweetener quantity.
Right. And then I think, to be honest, I think most people are not going to want to eat cranberries that are that tart.
No, nobody that isn't crazy like I am sometimes. Yeah. I'm like, oh, it's really good. It's so tart.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So that's kind of take the roof of your mouth off tart.
Yeah. It's like barely sweet. Like their sweetness is barely discernible.
Right. The other thing that is a huge thing in the States over the holidays is eggnog. And eggnog can very successfully be made keto, so you do not have to go without your eggnog. I remember the first Christmas I lived in America, I would start going in the stores at like the back end of October, and there would be gallons of eggnog, and I'm like, what is this? Where am I? What's happening? Why is all the milk been replaced with eggnog? Because that's not really a thing. It's a very, very kind of special treat in England. It's not something we generally do. But here it's a big thing. Eggnog is perfectly...
it's actually exceedingly keto if you make it so. If you make it yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
So, eggnog is easily... made in a hot chocolate. A lot of people like hot chocolate at the holidays. Hot chocolate is perfectly keto. I don't know if chocolate truffles are a big thing here. They're a big thing in England. They are made. There's a little bit of a trick to them because 100% unsweetened dark chocolate is a pain in the neck to work with. It's very, very finicky. So it does take a good recipe and a tiny modicum of patience, but chocolate rum truffles are perfectly ketofiable. Sugar cookies are perfectly able to be successfully ketofied. So
now, cookies, I will like to mention something.
Okay.
Cookies, I think it's important that we all adjust our expectations slightly. There are certain textures that are very easy to get in keto and certain ones that are very hard.
Yes.
Flaky is hard.
Yes.
As is crispy.
Yes. Definitely harder. Yes.
So I would just like to say, and this is where a bit of planning comes in. This is the same in every type of food. Think about what you can achieve and aim for that. So if you're like, but I need it to be crispy, okay, well, then you're going to have to think outside the box, and you're going to have to say, okay, well, what are crispy things? Nuts are crispy. So if I make a cookie with some nuts in it, I'm going to get more of that mouthfeel that I want than if I make it without the nuts, because the almond flour doesn't crisp up the way that regular flour does.
Right. Right. Sugar cookies are typically softer anyway,
Right.
so they work very, very well. What are the other traditional American things? There was
well, there's so you mentioned pies, and Thanksgiving is really a pie holiday. I will say that, you know, it's traditional to have pies and tarts for your Thanksgiving dessert. For Christmas, it's a little more across the board. There's more. People still do pies at Christmas, but you also might have something like a bûche de Noël, which is like a Yule log cake for those of you that don't speak French. But it's basically a roll cake, like a jelly roll cake kind of cake. And then you decorate it to look sort of like a log, and they're very cute. But those are super easy to make keto.
Right, they're just not super easy to make in the first place.
They're hard to.
Right. They're if you can make one in a non-keto one, then have at it. The keto version is easy, but the log rolls are one of those more highly skilled things that a lot of people have problems with, particularly the rolling part. So
right now, and then the second part comes in, which is the decorating part. If you're trying to create your roll cake to look like a log and you don't have any artistic ability, you will fast become a prime candidate for that show. It's called Nailed It. Have you heard of this? It's a TV show where it's based on, there's a meme out there where somebody tried to recreate like a fancy recipe and they totally made it look ridiculous. And then it's like hashtag nailed it. And so it's
the anti-nailed it.
It's ironic. Yeah. So anyway.
So in that case, if you have no decorating skills, just cover it in chocolate buttercream and don't call it a log.
Right. The easiest decorating tip I have is some powdered confectioner's swerve or any powdered sweetener. You can just blitz it in your blender or your coffee grinder. Put it in a sieve and sieve it over your dessert.
Or cocoa powder. You could sieve cocoa powder,
right?
Too.
Like it snowed, you know.
Yeah. Or you could even whip up some heavy cream and just spread that over it, or pipe some blobs. That's a technical term.
Yeah,
pipe some blobs down the middle and call it good.
Right. Whipped cream solves a bunch of problems. Your cheesecake cracked down the center and you don't like that. I don't really care personally, but you don't like that. You put some whipped cream on it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Fine.
Yeah. Whipped cream is your friend in more ways than one.
Right. Absolutely. So, cheesecakes also always a popular choice. Pumpkin cheesecakes. I have one in my cookbook.
If you want pumpkin things, you need to get our bundle. Or if you already have my holiday cookbook, you need to get Kim's holiday favorites, because it's like the be all and end all of everything good that is pumpkin.
I've got like pumpkin cake.
Except the ice cream. The pumpkin ice cream's in my book.
That's in Carrie's. Yeah, I moved to like a pumpkin pie. I have a layered pumpkin pie. It's all over. It's funny. I didn't even really love pumpkin that much once upon a time, but I figured out the spice mix that I really like with my pumpkin, and then now I like it. But okay, so in terms of other desserts, you can make almost anything for Christmas. As it's just the idea of it being very presentational. So you want something kind of impressive, and that's totally doable.
Right, and we've mentioned them a few times in passing, but panna cottas are super easy. Seriously super easy, super delicious, super keto, and you can make panna cottas look like $1 million. You can make them in advance, and you can totally impress the pants off of anybody that comes to your house.
And I'm a huge fan of panna cotta for a variety of reasons, all of the ones that Carrie just mentioned. And I make a dairy-free panna cotta with coconut milk that I think just tastes out of this world. It's amazing. It's creamy, which often the dairy-free people miss. And that way, if you know you've got somebody with food issues in terms of dairy, you can still feel good about serving them something that is delicious. The other part about it, which is great, is it's the sweetener in panna cotta is not a structural element. So you can have a wider range in terms of how you sweeten it.
You know, Kim, I think we could possibly continue talking about this topic until the end of the year.
Right, but we probably should.
We've been talking, we should, because we've been talking a long time. So maybe we need to do another sweetener/desserts episode in a little while.
Right.
But I think, I hope that's helped for the holidays. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be Thanksgiving this week. If you listen right away, if you listen later, it was Thanksgiving. I hope you had a good one. So hopefully that gave you some great ideas. I have some great recipes on my website. Carrie has some great recipes on her website. I have tiramisu up on my website, which is a fabulous holiday choice. Carrie, what's one you want to point people to on your website?
Well, the sugar cookies. The sugar cookies are up on my website. And also meringue cookies. We were talking about meringues. I've got meringue cookies up on there too. There's a bunch of stuff up there. But I hope also that although, you know, we did this for the holidays because people tend to be more focused on desserts of the holidays, I hope the tips towards the start of this episode are going to be things that help you all year round, not just during November and December.
Absolutely, because this chemistry and these results are workable in months outside of November and December as well. Okay, so we are going to wrap it up for today. Thank you for joining us. We hope you have a fabulous holiday, whatever you plan to be celebrating.
Yes, happy holidays. Or right, happy guys. July, if that's when you're listening to this.
Right, absolutely. Enjoy your life every month. All right, bye, guys.
See ya.
Thank you so much for joining us on Keto Life Support. If you'd like more, you can join our friendly Facebook group, Keto Life Support. Can't find it? Go to ketolifesupport.com. If you ever want to suggest a topic for discussion, that would be the place to do it. We'd really, really appreciate it if you would go to your podcast app and subscribe, because that's awesome. And what would be super awesome is if you'd be so kind as to write a review for us. Though we would love it if that review was awesome, just writing a review is all we ask. So have a fabulous keto week, and we'll see you next time.